everybody. We're super excited today to be chatting with Brandon Kunka on this episode of Teaching Tone for Percussion. I was very fortunate in my time as 4 years as a band director to have Brandon as our percussion instructor. So I was especially excited when he agreed to come on and talk to us a little bit about snare drum. Brandon, thank you so much for coming on and doing this with us.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. So, anybody who maybe does not know your name or know anything about you, would you mind just sharing a little bit about yourself and just what you're up to these days?
Sure. So I've been in the Atlanta area for, I think this is my 16th year. Um, I'm the owner of Backbeat Productions LLC, which is a private lesson studio, home recording studio, live performance business, pretty much anything in the performance or education or composition realm of music. And I'm also the founder of the Atlanta Youth Percussion Ensemble, which is a nonprofit honors audition-based percussion ensemble in the Atlanta area that has usually about 18 students from 9 to 10 different high schools all over the metro Atlanta area. I'm an active gigging musician with the Atlanta Wedding Band and a couple of tribute bands and cover bands in the area. Big fan of 90s rock, big 90s rock guy. So as much as I can play that, it's possible. My past life, I was a percussion director at a few different high schools for about 14 years, which I really enjoyed, but I'm definitely enjoying doing the private teaching and full-on freelancing thing right now.
Very cool. And because, as I mentioned, Brandon taught with me at my school when I was the band director for 4 years, Brandon has the wonderful opportunity to know all of my mistakes that I have made as a young band director. What are some of the most basic, fundamental things that we're doing to start out our percussionists on snare drum?
So a lot of times before we even get to sticks or the drum, we can work on clapping patterns and learning to read music and just kind of essentials like that, I think is very important. Um, Getting coordination between the right and the left hand, kind of alternating, say like you're patting on your legs or something like that, just to get that coordination down. So when the time comes to pick up sticks and think about technique and all that, the student doesn't necessarily have to think as hard about the coordination aspect of it because they've already got some sort of basis with that. Now, of course, that being said, it's going to get harder as you go. But if we're talking like half notes, quarter notes, maybe eighth note patterns, just getting used to the alternating before we think about holding the stick, I think, is very important. Um, some things when we are beginning to hold the stick. So fulcrum can be taught quite a few different ways. The way I like to teach it is with middle finger, pointer finger, and thumb. So a 3-finger front fulcrum. A big mistake that students will make is really squeezing these top 2 fingers right here, like kind of death squeeze a little bit. And so that actually sacrifices tone. You can hear a difference on the drum when the stick is being squeezed so tight because it's affecting the resonance of the wood of the stick, and therefore it's affecting the resonance of the wood or the drum. So these front 3 fingers. Another mistake is doing it with the back 2, okay? Because you lose control. And then the third mistake is fingers off, okay? So those are the big things when you're holding. I'm a Vic Firth artist, so all my stuff is Vic Firth. So if you look at this stick right here, you see the flag in between Vic Firth and the signature. I like to have my students place their thumb on that flag. So what it does is it gives you a little bit out of the stick and the majority in front of you, but you have enough to have a good rebound. The other thing is placement in the hand. I see a lot of beginning students try and put the stick right here where it's kind of like in between the 2 fatty parts of your hand. You want to make sure that it's at an angle kind of going out towards the pinky, not like this, but more kind of diagonally down so that you're able to utilize all of your fingers and you're in complete control of the stick. So the next thing we got to talk about is drum setup and how you hold the sticks in relation to the drum. So you see I've got a snare here. Something that's overlooked by a lot of directors is how you actually place the drum and how the student is playing the drum um, in relation to the snare wire. So if you'll notice, there's a little knob here, and that goes straight back to the snare strainer that turns the snares on and off. Um, you want the snare wire to be in a direct path with where the player is going to be playing because you're going to get this best snare response that way. A lot of times I'll see middle school students with the snares off to the side, so the snares are going this way. And the problem with that is when you get softer and you play closer to the edge, then you're not getting the same amount of snare response as you would if the snare is going vertically straight in line with where the student is playing. So that's really important. That's the thing that I think gets overlooked quite a bit is the placement of the actual drum. The other thing with placement of drum, a lot of times, especially when you're getting into concert music and you want to rehearse pieces really quickly and do quick changes and stuff like that, a lot of times the students will not change the height of the drum. And especially with beginning students, like you have kids that are 5.5 feet tall, you have kids that are 4.5 feet tall. There's a huge difference in arm sizes and that sort of thing. So you want to make sure that you have your arm nice and kind of bent, halfway bent at the elbow, but you don't want it so bent in like this. You don't want the wrist to be down like this, like if the drum is too low, and you don't want it to be up like this if the drum is too high. I generally try and do like either waist or belly button, depending on the length of the student's arms, but giving them time and reinforcing that they can actually change the height of the drum specific to their body size is going to help them with their technique immensely because they're not doing any of those weird things with their wrists or having to adjust, say, with someone that's a foot shorter than them or a foot taller than them and getting into weird situations. So the next thing, holding the stick to the drum, you want to have kind of like a A-frame, okay? I've heard it called a pizza slice, a rooftop, anything like that. So you want the sticks to be just north of center, and you want them to be as close together as possible. Because if you'll notice, I'll turn the snares off for a second. If I hit in different spots of the drum, each one has a different sound. So if a student's playing with one stick over here and one stick over here, then they're not going to be able to get a consistent sound out of the drum because you're hitting in two very different spots, and that very much affects the tone of the drum. So we like to start just north of center, not in the dead center because it's a little too dead. So you want just a little bit of that ring, a little bit of that overtone. So we're going just north of center. We're turning our wrists just a little bit. At this point, we're not using any forearm. We're just using wrist motion. Okay, and then when we alternate, we want to try and have the sticks in the same position on the drum. So in addition to that, one thing that I see a lot of students doing at the beginning is playing close to the edge of the drum. So that's acceptable when we're at softer dynamics. So what I like to do is just north of center is for anything mezzo forte and above. Halfway to the edge is for mezzo piano, and then the edge, not the very, very edge, but like say on like a Remo drum head, like the actual Remo insignia, is where you want to play for piano and below. So a lot of times I'll see students trying to play forte at the edge of the drum, and that's a huge issue because you're not getting full sound out of the drum. So it's like this kind of sound versus this. You could tell one has a lot more body to it and a lot more depth than the other one. But if I try and play piano in the center, it's a lot harder to get softer than if I'm out here at the edge. So zoning is very, very important when you are teaching dynamics for the first time. It's really, really critical. So that's kind of the basic. as far as how we hold the stick and how we play. We don't want to get into forearm until we start buzz rolls, but that's a little more advanced, something for kind of later. But as far as just starting out for basic strokes, we're using our wrists. We're doing what's called a full stroke, where the stick starts up and comes back up. Okay, in marching band, it's more like that. But for concert band, you could just have it about there. So the other side of this of playing snare drum at the beginning is learning the 4 different stroke types. So the first one, like I just said, is the full stroke, where you start up and you end up. That is one of our 2 loud strokes. The second one is called a downstroke. So you start up here and you use your wrist to stop the stick down low. So we're starting high, ending low. Okay, that's used for if you need to go from a loud stroke to a soft stroke, from an accent to a tap, which we'll explain in a second. That's a really good use of the downstroke. So then we have our 2 soft strokes, which are the tap stroke, where you start down and you end down, and then your up stroke, where you start down and you end up. So the tap stroke is for softer playing, honestly kind of normal playing. You can get a different level of velocity from your tap strokes. So as you can see, I'm playing low, but I'm hitting hard. And so that increases my sound, because we don't want our drummers playing up here all the time to get loud, right? We want them to be able to have stick control and not be just slamming on the drum the whole time. So the next level of that is adjusting your velocity. A quicker velocity is going to give you a louder sound, and a slower velocity is going to give you a softer sound. Okay? So to go back and review, we've got our full stroke, our downstroke, our tap stroke, and our upstroke. So 2 loud, 2 soft.
Brandon, what are some bad habits that you see inexperienced directors who maybe don't know anything about percussion or don't have a strong percussion background? Is there any bad pedagogy out there that exists whenever we're talking about dynamics or the amount of force we're putting into the drum head?
You can there are two It's kind of 2 extremes. There's overplaying and underplaying.
Mhm.
Um if we start on a practice pad, then a practice pad isn't going to give you a lot of sound, right? The practice pad is only going to give you that much sound,
Mhm.
whereas a snare drum at the same velocity is going to give you a ton of sound. And so a lot of times, when we're teaching on a pad, we're having our kids slam and really get after that. And then when we get to the drum, we're wondering, why are they playing so loud all of a sudden? And it's because we've we forget that the snare drum is a much louder instrument than the practice pad, which leads to the other extreme of underplaying and making having them be underbalanced with the band, because we just want to get percussion out of the way. We don't want to hear percussion. We just want to feel percussion, right? And so having them have forte be too soft like that can kind of be the other extreme. And so you want to find a nice balance in the middle. You want to make sure they're hitting with a proper velocity, but not so much that you're like denting or breaking the drum head, but not so little that it's not really audible. That can obviously be a challenge. Say you have like 11 percussionists in a group of 50 or something like that, and like the sound is obviously overpowering. You want to just limit the amount of students that you have on a drum at any given time, but you really want to watch what the students on the pads are doing and making sure that they're not overplaying and building bad habits that way.
That's all fantastic. And there's a lot of folks that are listening to this who are probably in the same boat that I was when I was a teacher and also did my student teaching, which was that they're not teaching beginning percussion in their own separate class. Because we obviously don't want to leave the folks in the back of the room unengaged, which is a very common critical mistake that I've been guilty of, and I know many others too. What are some things that we can do that are going to reinforce those strokes and allow us to check in on their technique while also perhaps even incorporating the other students in the room as well?
One thing you can do that is super useful is 8 on a hand, which is exactly what it sounds like. So you can do 8 quarter notes on the right, 8 on the left. Those can be eighth notes, they can be quarter notes, they can be half notes, they can be whatever you want them to be. Probably not whole notes because it would take too long. But that's a really great exercise to do full strokes and your tap strokes. So you can work on your forte, fortissimo, you can work on your mezzo forte. Going back to some things I said earlier about zoning, you probably at the very, very beginning, you want to reinforce playing just north of center, and then we introduce the different zones a little bit later on with mezzo piano and piano, just so that we're not confusing them about like where exactly am I supposed to be playing at this point, right? So we just want to do that central location so that they're getting used to playing in the spot with the most depth and the most sound. But doing 8 on a hand, I think, is fantastic. You can do double strokes. They're not going to be necessarily double strokes as in like a roll yet, but you could do right, right, left, left. And you can alternate right, left, right, left. So any combination of 1, 2, 4, 8, even 16 on one hand, and then the exact same thing on the other. The goal being to get a uniform sound in between the two sticks. So that's a really, really good way to keep them engaged and focused on their sound. You can add, once they start getting a little more advanced, you can add paradiddles. Paradiddle. Which is rudiment, which is right, left, right, right, left, right, left, left. So that's something that to get them started with rudiments you can do as well. Another rudiment that's really good to get them started with is a flam. So a flam being a combination of a downstroke and an upstroke. So you have what's called a grace note where your left hand, in this example, is lower than the right hand. So you have a soft note and a loud note. And then when you come up, now the left hand is high doing the downstroke and the right hand is low doing the upstroke. So you can do that in half notes. And that's a really good way to start with two rudiments there, the paradiddle and the flam. You're going to see the flam constantly in music. It's all over the place. So that's a really, really good thing for them to get started with early so they know what that means. Drawing it on the board, making sure they know what it looks like in music. It will be really, really beneficial.
Brandon, do you have any thoughts on anybody who might be starting a brand new school year at a new school, or might be teaching students that already have a couple of years of experience under their belt that might have a couple of bad habits that we want to avoid? Could you maybe share some of those most common bad habits to look out for?
Sure. So middle school students can be stubborn. I think we all know that a little bit. um, so sometimes, it's well, my teacher said this, or my teacher said that, or I learned it this way on YouTube, or like kind of however, because there's such a wealth of information out now, but not all of it is quality necessarily. So a lot of times, I've had private students come up and show me things that they learned on YouTube, and I'm like, what is going on here? So, um, the biggest things you got to look out for. So, kind of recapping some stuff that we talked about: the fulcrum, making sure making sure that they're not squeezing too hard with these, or they're playing from the back or anything, keeping their fingers on the stick, and utilizing those front three fingers. Uh, the other issue is playing position on the drum. Like we said, getting it set up in the right way and then making sure they're playing in the correct spot, appropriate for the dynamic. By the time you're in 7th and 8th grade, you should know the different zones of the drum. I would say definitely by middle of 7th grade, you should definitely know the different zones of the drum, just so you're able to utilize that for proper dynamic playing. Because a lot of times that's something that can get overlooked is where to play and why we're playing there. Um, so those are some of the biggest pitfalls I would look out for. That, and then going back to the percussionists in the back of the room, especially in middle school, like they don't have the initiative to change the height of the drum when they set up for a piece. Is just whatever it happens to be at that time. And say you're in a 6 through 12 school and a high schooler played it last, and now you've got a sixth grader on the drum. That's a huge height difference, you know. So that just making sure that that's something that gets reinforced that maybe wasn't reinforced before.
Indeed. And no matter what our primary instrument is, I'm a brass player by trade. And so, but even those of us who have had applied lessons in college, I'm sure many of our professors have told us at some point, whenever we sit down to play our instrument, to adjust the stand, to adjust our chair, to do what we need to do to be the most comfortable, to make the best sound on our instrument. Percussion is no different. And I think the more that we hold ourselves accountable to checking on our students to do that, the more that they'll hold themselves accountable. I also know with them being in the back of the room, something that Brandon was fantastic about was always reminding me to not just be teaching from the front of the room, especially with those beginners. Be walking around the room as much as you possibly can and get back there with your percussionists and make sure you see that you're checking on all this stuff very much up close. Everything he's talking about is wonderful information, but we have to go that extra mile for our percussionists purely because they're geographically farther away from us most times.
Absolutely. Yeah, getting your hands dirty back there is priceless. It really is.
Brandon, this has all been really terrific stuff. We can't tell you how much we appreciate it. And as with every other video in this series, this is not supposed to be the end-all be-all information on snare drum. This is just something to get us all started. Brandon, if anybody has any questions about anything you've covered today or just has any specific snare drum questions, do you mind if they email you?
No, not at all. So you can go to my website, www.backbeatatl.com. You can email me directly at info@backbeatatl.com. You can, on the website, you could do a contact submission, or you can just email me directly, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have, or any problems that arise, even stuff that happens maybe past this series. Would be happy to help.
Fantastic. And I will link to all of that stuff in the description of this video. Brandon, we appreciate your time so much and can't thank you enough for sharing all this with us.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. Really excited to be part of this.